Recording, because to my shock, there are people who like to watch this.
Do you have the
This too.
do you have the book?
Yeah, I think it's here.
Mom and Dad, you're not muted.
What? Oh, sorry.
Okay, so now's the time if you wish to have a conversation in your own home. It's good to mute yourself. And we'll go ahead and get started. So tonight we are talking about marriage. I feel like there is a lot to say about weddings, and perhaps some of the most interesting conversations we could have very little to do with the liturgy itself. We could go in about a zillion different directions, and I hope if you want to talk about stuff, you will go ahead and unmute and just talk about stuff. So we can discuss the place of marriage in society generally. We can talk about, let someone in. Fuad has never been here before. We can talk about the fact that the number of marriages solemnized in church has plunged like a rock over the last 20 years or so. We can talk about the commercialization of marriage and the wedding industry. We can talk about the remarkably rapid change of heart the church has had regarding same-gender marriage that has occurred even since our book was published in 2006. So there's a whole lot to say. There's so many different directions we could go. But let's go ahead and open the book to page 286. Someone who's got a lot of background noise. That's all. 2 years ago, Chicken went on PBS, Hispanic Network, to champion controls on high capacity. When I was on ATS SWAT teams, Okay. So page 286. And let's go ahead and read the description of the church's view of marriage on the top of page 286. Marriage is a gift of God, intended for the joy and mutual strength of those who enter it, and for the well-being of the whole human family. God created us male and female and blessed humankind with the gifts of companionship, the capacity to love, and the care and nurture of children. Jesus affirmed the covenant of marriage and revealed God's own self-giving love on the cross. The Holy Spirit helps those who are united in marriage to be living signs of God's grace, love, and faithfulness. Marriage is also a human estate with vows publicly witnessed. The church in worship surrounds these promises with the gathering of God's people, the witness of the word of God, and prayers of blessing and intercession. So, pretty high and holy stuff for the church's view of marriage. However, marriage at its heart is really a secular institution. The piece of paper signed and sealed at the county recorder's office is the one sign that really counts in the eyes of the law and of society. You can have a ceremony in church. You can do every letter of the liturgy exactly as it's printed in the book. But if you don't sign that legal document, you're not really married. On the other hand, you can be married at the courthouse, not in church, and just about everybody, including your church friends and your pastor, will still understand that you are indeed married. So let's walk through the service. There are quite a few places in here that are rather on the countercultural side. We know that in this country, the wedding industry is huge. There are a number of traditions that have taken root that really have no basis in the liturgy of any church. The church has a vision for what the sacred rite for marriage might look like, and popular culture, the wedding industry, has its own vision. The church very often ends up yielding to the cultural pressure. So first, we have the entrance. The rubrics don't give us very much direction for the wedding procession, although I have been to weddings where the entrance is so long and complex that it takes up half the length of the ceremony. So parents and grandparents are escorted to their seats. Sometimes people give bouquets of flowers to various family members. There's a zillion bridesmaids, a flower girl, a ring bearer. The music changes dramatically. The doors are opened by unseen footmen as if this were some kind of royal palace, and the bride shows up in her amazing, expensive gown. The rubric neither allows nor disallows this type of procession. So it just says the ministers and the wedding group enter. Hymn, song, or instrumental music may accompany the entrance. I think a great conversation we can have just at the very beginning here is to think about how the notion of how so many people think of weddings as the bride's day, and the whole thing is about the bride at the center of everyone's attention. The church's vision for the marriage rite would be that God is at the center, and the couple with their friends and their families have come into a sacred space to ask for God's blessing. The custom of giving away the bride, I think, is something that it's a huge tradition. It's culturally popular. We should really think about whether it's a good idea anymore. In a day and age when we believe that both members of a couple are equal partners, it would be worth considering that in this entrance procession, the bride and the groom enter together. There is no moment in this liturgy when someone gives away the bride as if she were someone's personal property. So they're in. It's long and complex. It's very simple. There are congregations and members of congregations who like the procession to look sort of like a church procession, led with a processional cross, the people participating in the wedding, the clergy. And then, of course, there's the cultural version that I described a second ago. So you could have the procession be just as simple as people come in the door and away you go. So interesting. The greeting is the same as that starts any Sunday service. And we'll see that just like we learned in the funeral 2 weeks ago, the basic pattern for this service is going to be familiar. The Leader's Edition of the hymnal, again, provides quite a few optional texts that you don't see here in your book. So immediately after the greeting, the Leader's Edition provides 3 possible texts for welcoming people and introducing them to what is going to happen in the service. And then after that, at the top of page 287, we see the declaration of intention. These words are quite similar to the vows that will be spoken later, but these are not the vows. This right here is really parallel to the presentation of candidates at baptism. So each member of the couple asserts at this time that they have come willingly to this moment and they are ready to enter into the holy estate of marriage. So it's sort of a presentation. Here we are. The gathered assembly is also asked to declare their support for the couple, again, just as we do in baptism. The Leader's Edition has some alternate texts. It's just kind of fun to note that the response is not "I do," it's "I will." It doesn't mean a whole lot, but everybody says, we said our "I do's." If you use the liturgy, you never said "I do" once. There's a prayer of the day, just like in a Sunday liturgy. You see this one printed here, and there is a second option in the Leader's Edition. And then we have readings from Scripture. Just like in the funeral liturgy, the couple may choose just a reading or 2, or you can do the full liturgical pattern with Old Testament, Psalm, New Testament, Gospel acclamation, Gospel with all their responses. And just like at the funeral, if you're going to be having Holy Communion as part of this service, your last reading should be one of the Gospels. There are lists of suggested readings available. So once again, you're not starting from absolutely nothing, or you may even opt for something other than 1 Corinthians 13, which is a lovely reading that sort of has become the fallback for everybody. So that's certainly a good option, but there are many other good options, and any couple looking for readings can be given a list to choose from. Just like on Sunday mornings, after the readings, there is a sermon, long or short, depending on how much the pastor thinks you need to hear. And that is followed by a hymn of the day. It's always interesting working with couples and suggesting the idea of singing a hymn during their service. Some people love the idea, and others are just, they don't even know, why would you do such a crazy thing? But it's church, and the church sings when it gathers, and we can provide, again, lists of hymns that work really nicely for weddings. On page 288, we get to the meat of this service, the thing we all came for, the vows. There are two options here printed for the vows. It's also possible, as in so many parts of our liturgy, to write the same thing in similar words. You can write your own vows if you want to. The only necessity with the vows is a pledge of lifelong faithfulness. Each member of the couple says the words in full. They are most often spoken one line at a time at the minister's prompting, but there are other ways of doing that. They can be memorized, although that might be a little bit dicey for somebody who's a little nervous and emotional at the same time. They can be read from a small card that the minister is discreetly holding. But ideally, ultimately, the voice of the person making the pledge should be predominant, more audible than the sound of the minister's prompts. We really want to hear the people make their pledges. There is a giving of rings. It surprises some people to learn that rings are not a requirement, but they're pretty universal. Again, the Leader's Edition has a prayer that blesses the rings before they are exchanged. And then you see two different choices of wording. And again, the person exchanging the ring says the text in full. And then at the bottom of the page, we see the acclamation. The vows themselves are what made the marriage. And here, the minister announces that the couple is now married. Probably the most well line in the entire marriage service is some version of this line, "Those whom God has joined together, let no one separate." Those words come from the Gospels, both of Matthew and Mark. And then it says in the rubric, the assembly may applaud, and then there may be a hymn or some other sung music at that time. And following that, other symbols of marriage may be given or used at this time. So right here, this might include rituals unique to one's ethnic tradition. So for example, African Americans sometimes jump over a broom at a wedding. In Eastern Orthodox traditions, the bride and groom get crowns to wear at this moment. Lois, did you get to do that? Did you have a Lutheran wedding? You're muted. I'm curious about this though. Still muted.
Tim, if you try to unmute her, a thing will pop up for her that says the host wants you to unmute, and then she can click on that.
There we go.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm curious if you had an Orthodox wedding and if you got to wear a crown.
Well, we had two.
Okay.
So my father was a Lutheran minister, and we were married by him in the Lutheran church in Hayward. And then, of course, before we went away on a honeymoon, we went to the Orthodox church across the bay and were remarried or married a second time with crowns. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's lots of fun traditions from different parts of the world. I'm pretty sure that the Unity candle was invented by Hallmark as a way of selling more bouquets and candles. But the Unity candle is something that can happen here too. Though that candle is tremendously popular, it has no liturgical basis in any church. It's not necessary. The rings themselves are a sign of unity. And if you're going to celebrate Holy Communion, that is also a huge celebration of community with the entire congregation. So other stuff you might do, I've heard of unity sand too. People have different colors of sand and they pour them into a jar. It's all made up. It's fine, but there's nothing magical about any of it. Then we reach the top of page 289 with this lovely marriage blessing. The couple is then blessed using these words that you see here or other words. And at this point, we resume a pattern that should be familiar from any Sunday service. So there are prayers of intercession for the world and its needs, just like on Sunday. And at this point, we may or may not have Holy Communion. And the communion liturgy itself can be elaborate or simple. It's important that communion be offered to the entire assembly and not just to the wedding party. If there has been no communion, we find ourselves on page 290, where the service continues with the Lord's Prayer, and then the peace, and the rubric says, the couple may greet one another with the kiss of peace. So this makes this kissing moment much less of a spectacle than you may kiss the bride, and become part of the holy witness of the service if the kissing happens as part of the peace. And then we have two options for a final blessing at the bottom of the page. Notice that we already blessed the couple on the previous page. So this blessing, just like at the blessing at the end of any service, is a blessing of the entire assembly. And then there may be a hymn or instrumental music as the wedding couple and the ministers depart. That's it in a nutshell. It doesn't take long to talk about that part, but I'm curious what you all are interested in or where you'd like to take the conversation.
Tim, I was just going to share that last time at the end, you said that since you've been at Grace, there had been maybe 6 or 7 weddings, I think. I forget.
Yeah.
My older sister, who's 5 years older than me, actually was married at Grace.
Before my time, but yes.
Before your time.
When was she married?
Oh, wow. No idea. They just celebrated their 15th anniversary.
Okay, there you go. So I've been here 11 years.
Yeah.
Our daughter was married there too, and that was in 2000. So before time, Tim.
Yeah, but it's a fairly recent phenomenon that people have not been interested in church weddings anymore. I write down every wedding and every funeral in a notebook, and I have done 5 at Grace. One was of sort of the traditional young couple in their 20s getting married for the first time that you might expect. 2 were of kind of middle-aged couple. 3 were middle-aged couples. I think 1 was a first marriage and the others were second or third marriages. And then I did a renewal of vows once. But in the record from my previous church, where I worked for 9.5 years, I think I had done at least 30. So it's really a dramatic change. And I don't really know what all the factors are about that. I think some people have just decided that getting married in church is not important to them. I have noticed that of the people who do want to get married in church, they're not even necessarily interested in connecting anymore with the church community. Stanford Memorial Church still does probably 3 or 4 weddings every Saturday. And it's because people want to be in the majesty of Stanford Memorial Church. The Methodist Church in downtown Palo Alto, I used to be on their list of wedding organists, and they would have weddings almost every Saturday because it's a high ceiling, a big long aisle. It's got a massive pipe organ. So people really are very often just seeking a venue, and the church is just sort of one of many possible venues. So you might like the beach, you might like the place where you're having your big dinner because you're going to be there anyway, or you might want a really spectacular looking church. But I think the whole idea of sort of returning to a community in which you grew up or a community that you would like to be part of as a married couple has become not a priority for a lot of people.
Jan, looks like Jan's hand is up.
Go ahead. Jan, I can't hear you.
Zachary and Shirley met in the choir at St. Martin's Episcopal in Davis. And as choir members, their wedding was part of the morning worship. And they processed in with the choir in their wedding talks, and they sat with the choir and they sang with the choir, and the pastor, priest, whatever, announced in the announcements, if you happen to be visiting this morning, we're having a wedding and you're welcome to join us at the reception afterwards. It was wonderful.
I love that. I have participated in a Sunday morning wedding one time in my life, and they're really fun. I mean,
It was really good.
it pretty much has to be the description that you just told us about. Like a couple maybe met each other at church. Church is a very important part of their lives. And then it's...
And the choir director taught music at Davis, and we wound up with I think it was a string quartet in the church fellowship hall making music. It was really good.
Yeah.
Shirley had been the church administrator secretary for 10 years at that point. And they approved of Zachary.
Oh, good.
Tim, this is Joan.
Yeah.
I think getting married was a very, very stressful thing to do because Craig and I were probably unusual now. We're both Lutheran. And so it seemed reasonable to get married in a church for a variety of reasons. But if I had asked my family to enter a church, I think a number of them would have said, I'm not coming. I mean, there's so much complexity now with people's different values. So we had a really nice outdoor wedding with a Lutheran minister. We had communion, we used a liturgy, but it was like, I felt like I was going through a meat grinder to get married. And I just found it a very stressful experience because there were so many different points of view. And believe me, the day after we got married, we were supposed to go to Yosemite and we decided we're just resting for a day.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Joan. There's so many emotions and around weddings, and sometimes they're good, and sometimes there's just a lot of sort of imposed external stress, and it's nice not to, just not to make a big deal out of it.
So Tim, when did this transition happen where people started to having more marriages outside of churches?
Yeah, I think it was in some sense gradual, but it's been just really noticeable. Like enough people now aren't doing it anymore. It's become noticeable within the last 10 years. And like I say, there's so many reasons for it that I couldn't pinpoint any particular one.
I figured out that our Grace wedding was in 1999
Oh, okay.
for Ellen and Kyle. Yeah.
So 22 years ago.
I was really wrong on the anniversary thing.
Wasn't it 1999? It was because actually
I think so. Yeah.
my father died at the end of that year, and so
All right.
it's not. Yeah, Grandpa died. Yeah, it was a little fraught, but it worked out.
Dan, you're about to say something?
I was wedding coordinator at Grace about 24 years ago. And we had so many weddings. I mean, it was just booked. And then all of a sudden, within 2 or 3 years, they wanted to get married at the beach or some other place.
Yeah.
And church was not the important part.
Yeah, it was a relatively quick but not immediate change,
Yeah.
I think.
And think about it, the wedding party itself, sometimes consisting of 10, 12, 25 people. brides and grooms and attendants. They will never get together as a group like they do on a wedding rehearsal night. And this was one thing that Pastor Farnes brought out one time, actually every time we had a wedding rehearsal for the night before the wedding type thing. And when you stop and think about it, it's really true. It's an unusual group of people.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah.
Tim, I can maybe add, and it's a bit of a question because some of that might be a bit of a California thing. Part of that is in the US, weddings are issue. I mean, you alluded to this. They're a huge commercial transaction at the end of the day. And it's not that there aren't nice weddings in the rest of the world. And when you go to India, if not 600 people show up, you failed.
Yeah.
But it is stressful. And I think what we have also seen is that for the last 10, 15 years, the costs of doing this nicely, the way the internet dictates to you, are so exorbitant to young couples that things become sort of, either it gets really expensive and then you have to go to a destination in the Caribbean, or you make it really quick and easy because otherwise it gets too expensive. I did notice this a couple of years ago. I designed a survey for one of my kids' schools in Menlo Park. And one of the questions was, what do you do on weekends with your kids? And we give them a whole list of options. And one of them was, will attend church. So number one, I got flagged for even daring to offer this as an option, because I'm imposing my religious doctrine by even saying that's a possibility. The other one is we had 104 families fill this in. Anybody wants to guess how many families attended church out of 104 in Menlo Park?
Yeah, 10. 2?
No, really?
Oh.
We were one of them.
Uh-huh.
And I knew the other family. That was it.
Oh.
Yeah.
Now,
So
in Germany, what happens, because you pay a church tax if you want to? What if a couple who doesn't pay the church tax wants to get married in a church, or doesn't that happen?
Oh, well, thank you for asking. So disclosure, I have 5 Lutheran pastors in Germany in my family. So we need these taxes to roll. So number one, it's not voluntary. It gets directly taken out of your paycheck.
Yeah.
And it is actually, so that has led to pretty stable incomes, somewhat declining because church membership in Germany is collapsing. But B, it's very visual for a lot of people, which has actually had the effect that more and more people leave the church because every month they see exactly how much money they, in this case, don't want to give. In general, the churches in Germany are so desperate to see anybody under the age of 60 to walk into the door that they don't care. If you show up, great. It's still in, at least the area I grew up into, it's sort of the equivalent of North Dakota. If you don't get married in church, people will talk. But it's times are changing in the sense. By the way, I can share one quick anecdote about my wedding. It was supposed to be at First Lutheran, and 10 days ahead of the appointment, the pipes broke and the church flooded. And by the way, Gretchen was at First Lutheran at the time. And so the helpful advice was, just cancel your wedding, with everybody traveling in from all over the world, and don't worry about it. And so we said, we can't really do this, with 10 days to go. So we, this was Pastor Kemp Segerhammer at the time. So he married my dad, and Pastor Kemp married us at the Catholic church just 3 blocks up.
St. Thomas?
Sorry?
St. Thomas Aquinas?
Yeah.
Yes.
And which was very nice. Now keep in mind, a lot of my friends are Jewish. So they walk in and there is this humongous iron wrought cross with Jesus on it. So I don't know what they were thinking. Most of the Lutherans looked up and saying, that's not quite our style. And my wife's family is Mormon, so 90% boycotted the wedding and the other ones probably felt slightly uneasy. So it was a perfect California wedding.
I love it.
That is a good story, but it gets into, so Dan and Joan are both sort of talking about how just more and more people in society these days are uneasy in a church, particularly a church that they don't necessarily affiliate with. So I think that could be part of the decline. I think certainly a huge part of it is just decline in church attendance in general. And a giant percentage of our population just, they don't go to church normally. So honestly, I think it makes sense that they would not get married in churches.
But there are also sort of destination churches, and even people who don't go to church or not regularly because it's a nice building or.
Yeah, I think we talked about that right before you came in.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Like, Stanford Memorial Church and the Methodist Church downtown are huge wedding venues. And a lot of the people who come to them are not churchgoers. They're people who sort of want the tradition of having a wedding in a church. Just before we started this class, I was kind of trying to think, like, how and when did the wedding industry in this country turn into such a humongous, expensive thing? And I started wondering, like, is it when they started televising royal weddings? So I looked it up. Princess Margaret in England was the first to get married on TV in 1960. And I'm sure it was this spectacular televised program with a monstrous white dress in Westminster Abbey. And probably every human being, especially every girl on the planet, then decided, that's what I want my wedding to look like. And so we talk about, like, it was a fairy tale wedding. That, people are looking for a particular image in a wedding that isn't necessarily what the church is always prepared to offer.
When we got married, it was going the other way. I mean, it was the middle of the hippie era, and people were out on the beach barefoot and strewing flowers and flowers in their hair and all. So
is that what you did, Mary?
No. Well, man, I told the line. Roger was out here going to Stanford, and I finished up, I was a year behind, so I finished up at Carleton and had a job that summer. I wrangled a job out here in Palo Alto. Actually, it was in Los Gatos in this home for disturbed children, which almost made me not have any after that summer. Wow, a bunch of crazy.
Where did you meet if you went to Carleton and he went to Stanford?
No, he went to Carleton too, but when he graduated, he decided he was never going to live east of the Rocky Mountains again. So he applied to graduate schools up and down the West Coast and ended up at Stanford.
One of the strange things
I wanted to finish my degree, so I stayed and finished. And then we had to, these days I would have just packed up and, headed out to Palo Alto, and we would have, I don't know what we would have done. But anyway, didn't do that back then. So there was this elaborate thing where we were going to have a wedding in my hometown in northern Minnesota. And the only time we could do it was during winter break. So we had a wedding in December in northern Minnesota.
What town?
Huh?
What's the name of the town?
Well, actually, it was in Superior, Wisconsin, Duluth, Minnesota. That's
okay.
But we lived on the Wisconsin side when I was in school, and so that's where my parents were living. So it was very elaborate. Almost didn't happen. Roger's parents from Portland, there was a big storm and flood, and the train station flooded, and they couldn't get on the train, and they had to fly, and I don't know. It was just, but.
Well, the strangest thing I did, as it turned out, is I saved my wedding dress for my daughters, forgetting that Norman was 6'2", and Karen's 6 feet and Rebecca's 5'10". It didn't fit either of them. I'm just under 5'2" now.
So I don't know. Yeah. So I don't know. Yeah. So we managed to pull it off. We got married on a Tuesday night because it was after Christmas, 29th of December. It had to be after Christmas, but leave us enough time to drive back to California so Roger could register for winter quarter at Stanford on January 3rd.
Well, Tim's comment about how it's become commercial. When we got married in 1964, the women of the church prepared the food. That used to be the tradition.
Well, that's what happened with me too, was a, typical church basement reception.
Yeah. And so that cut down on the expense considerably.
Yeah, so we had, I don't know, snacks, some kind of little sandwiches and stuff. And
Well, I remember I had the wedding in the evening, so we wouldn't have to serve a full meal. I guess I was,
evening because people had to come after work. And a few people missed it because they figured it was on a Saturday. By the time Saturday came, it was way too late.
We had the wedding on a Tuesday anyway.
Tuesday night. Yeah. So anyway, but yeah. So then, but I mean, there were all kinds of crazy weddings and stuff that went on, and the beach and everything. So I don't know when when Ellen got married, yeah, it was pretty, there were getting to be more and more elaborate weddings. But Ellen and her husband, fiance, didn't have any much interest in it, except they wanted to have a wedding. They didn't live here. They lived in Seattle, and they didn't really want to get married in Seattle because they'd have to plan it themselves. So they decided that they'd make everyone happy and have a wedding at home at Grace Lutheran, but Mom was going to plan it. So they blew in. They blew in a couple days before, and I did all the legwork. I think Ellen came down one weekend and something.
I live in Rhode Island during the academic year, and there people will rent one of the Newport mansions. That's where the 19th century rich used to come in the summer, and they built these huge mansions. And there are quite a few weddings in those mansions. And then you can have the reception right there.
In fact, I can't remember. Who was the pastor then, Rhoda? I can't remember.
What year was it?
1999.
Was it?
Still Randy. Well,
Randy.
It wasn't Randy though.
Wasn't
Well, Laura and Cam were married by Randy and my dad in 2000, August of 2000.
I have to admit that obviously I'm a little out of touch with when the wedding happened. I have very little recollection of it because I was super nervous, and I just was so nervous that I remember some of the reception, but the ceremony I felt like I was going to pass out the whole time, and I was just trying to not lock my knees because somebody had told me I feel like I'm going to pass out.
I don't remember much about it either.
The
reception, yeah. The reception wasn't at Grace though. Man, that was the best idea I had. Back then I was really active in Neighbors Abroad, the Sister City program in Palo Alto. And we used to have these elaborate fundraisers because we were trying to raise money for a couple projects in our sister cities. And so I got this bright idea that this whole crew, of which I was one of, I offered them to pay them if they would put on a reception for us. And so, yeah, so I didn't have to pay a caterer or someone big money. I made a big charitable contribution, and we rented the Palo Alto Civic Center and the garden, and it was great.
We had like 50 pounds of meatballs.
Huh?
Rolled with courtesy of the Neighbors Abroad. We had like so many we had meatballs.
I don't think it was meatballs, was it? I can't remember. That's terrible, but I
remember that.
I can't remember.
All I remember is the meatballs. Honestly.
I don't know if Ellen and Kyle remember or not.
I don't remember.
My good friend at St. Olaf, who was from Richmond, Virginia, not too many of those there. Anyway, she wanted to have a champagne reception at this St. Olaf wedding. And I can't remember if they allowed it or not. I think probably not. That was in the days even before they allowed social dancing at St. Olaf.
Oh, goodness.
Do they allow alcohol in Grace Lutheran, Tim?
I think you technically have to get council permission to have alcohol at Grace.
Do they grant it?
Yeah, they'll grant it.
I was gonna say, if you were at an Episcopal church, they probably had their own bar.
Yeah, exactly. So when I hear stories like this, it really makes me advocate a lot for very simple weddings, whether it's at the church or not at the church. Keep it simple because they're stressful for everybody. They're stressful for the couple, they're stressful for the guests, they're stressful for the family. They're a lot of work, they're a lot of expense. I think honestly, if we moved into an era of very small, simple weddings, I'd be perfectly happy. And I think a lot of people would be. But there's a lot of cultural expectation, which includes the church part and the outside the church part.
Grace. Well, at least Grace was cheap too.
Yeah, why don't we have more?
We thought about Stanford. The group was a Stanford graduate, but it cost a lot. Whereas Grace, we didn't pay.
Joan wants to say something.
Oh, actually, Lois was the wedding planner coordinator for that for us. But yeah,
Your
Tim,
mom
what
wants
do you
to say
want
something,
for a
Tim.
wedding?
Hold on.
Your mom wants.
Joan wants to talk.
Joan, talk.
Okay, Mom.
Okay.
Okay, all right.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of times weddings are planned like a year or more in advance, and maybe a wedding planner is hired, and I mean, thousands and thousands of dollars are put into it. And I'm thinking of a contrast at the church that we went to when we still lived in South Dakota. It was during the Iraq War, and the man of the couple was about to be shipped off to Iraq. And the couple decided they wanted to get married. So the dad planned the wedding. And he said, if you can get a funeral put together in 3 days, we can do a wedding in 3 days. And so they did. He got the food, he got the dress, he got the music, he got everything together. And my feeling is they were just as married and just more memorably married than those who had spent a year or more planning for this big extravaganza.
I agree.
Another thing is, I think as a result of the pandemic, I know I have a couple of former students who were going to get married last summer, and they just decided they'll do it, and had a very small, simple wedding. And maybe a year from now, or we'll have a reception or a party. But I think a lot of weddings have been simplified because of the pandemic, and it might be a good trend to start and carry on even when you can have huge groups of people together.
Mm-hmm.
have you noticed that I have this invisibility?
Hey, you're gone right now, Mary.
Seems to go with your coffee cup, doesn't it?
I know, it's a magic potion that makes me invisible.
Joan Ferguson, did you want to say something also?
Well, I guess to me, the marriage ceremony felt overburdened. And I think what happens in the few years after that is so critical, sort of helping people figure out what being married is really about. And what I think is evident at churches and Grace in particular is when a child comes on the scene and all the support and community that nurtures a child. I think the parents may not be formally part of those programs, but they're also learning how to be married and how to have reinforcement that you really need to work out a good marriage. And I think the role of church in marriage is really after the wedding.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think the very best situations for church weddings are when the couple gets married in a church community that they intend to be part of. And then the church can support them in the first years of their marriage. And as they begin to have children at that time, the church is really here to offer critical support. And kind of if you're getting married in some other church that's not your community, you're never really setting yourself up to receive that support that the church could offer.
Plus that sort of moment, a couple years after you had that glamorous wedding, you wake up and you look at the person next to you and you say, oh my God, what's going on here? Who is that person? And I really think we don't put enough attention on the developmental stages of marriages or just committed relationships and what it takes to keep them healthy.
Mm-hmm. Anything else on weddings and marriage, or shall we move on to something else?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Maybe I don't think it's really a trope, but like I think I've been to one like Catholic wedding and it was incredibly long. And I remember thinking, wow, it's so long, but it's really nice that they let them sit down because they sit in chairs. And I thought that I was like actually very surprised by the sitting down part. I thought it just seemed kind of informal, but then as it went on and on, I thought, oh, now I understand why there's chairs involved. But I'm curious, why is the liturgy for a Catholic wedding so much longer than, say, a Lutheran wedding?
Yeah. So a Catholic wedding really is required to be, in most cases, a full mass, which means you will have, as I described, like in a Lutheran wedding, when you get to the place of the readings, you can just have a short reading and be done. Whereas in a Catholic wedding, you would be required to have an Old Testament reading, a Psalm, a New Testament reading, a Gospel. So you kind of go through all of that stuff. That's part of a normal Sunday service. So then what ends up happening is the wedding is the length of a normal Sunday service plus the wedding specific parts. So a Catholic wedding very easily can be an hour long. And yes, the sitting down is just that you can't expect anyone to stand there for an hour.
You know, when I was a kid, when Catholics couldn't eat anything, I don't know how many hours before they took communion. All the Catholic weddings were in the morning, and then afterwards they would have a wedding breakfast. Mm-hmm. And my father's side of the family was Catholic, so I remember a lot of those weddings. I imagine that must have changed with Vatican II.
I think there is. I would have to look it up. I think there really still is some amount of time you're supposed to fast before receiving communion. It might be like 12 hours. Which then again, you can't stand for a whole hour if you haven't eaten since last night. So sitting down is good. So a Lutheran wedding can be, if you choose for it to be, every bit as long, because you can do all the normal elements of a Sunday service if you wish. That's just not very common. It's more typical just to have short readings, to maybe only sing one hymn, not several. Even if you're going to have communion, to kind of truncate the liturgy a little bit, but you could, if you wanted, you could do the whole communion liturgy, starting with the Lord be with you and also with you, going all the way through all the normal parts of the communion liturgy. So there's just, as we've seen throughout this whole year looking at the book, there's a lot of flexibility in the way our liturgy works. And so things can be very elaborate and ritualistic, or they can be quite short. In the Catholic Church, they're required to go through the whole ritual.
But too short, and that means if you're 10 minutes late, you miss the wedding.
Well, and I have been to weddings that are literally 10 minutes long. Or I suggested at the very beginning, I have been to weddings where just the procession in takes at least 10 minutes. And then the wedding itself is only 10 minutes. So personally, I think it's nice when you beef up the liturgy a little bit. Like if we're going to come to church, this is me going into my church nerd mode again. If you're going to come to church, let's have church. But yes, you'll be allowed to sit down. Like you don't have to worry about being forced to stand there for an hour.
Is there a traditional amount of money that you give the organist?
We have so few weddings here that I don't remember how much money I'm supposed to get. But we have a fee schedule, and people are given a list of fees if they ask to have a wedding here.
Is it less if you belong to the congregation?
You're asking questions I don't know the answers to.
I think you know the answers and you're just not telling us.
I
It's
think,
not, it is not less for the organist, but there may be other fees.
as I recall, they don't charge you for the church.
I think that's right. So there's like a,
We paid the organist and the other Tim one, and some other things like that. I think we paid the minister, whoever that was. Why can't I remember that? It wasn't Randy. I'll have to ask Ellen, see if she remembers. I was going to make one comment about the music thing, because that was one thing I remember when I got married. You couldn't, they would refuse to play the wedding march. Because
yeah,
it wasn't sacred music.
there's all kinds of different, people have all kinds of different opinions about what music is appropriate or not appropriate for a wedding, which we didn't really get into. I still sort of take issue with some just kind of popular songs that are all about like our love for each other or whatever, that don't
Only
really,
just begun.
yeah, we've only just begun, or people loved, some say love is like a river. There's a bunch of different ones that have kind of risen and fallen in popularity through the years. But there used to be some objection even to certain organ music, and people would object to the wedding march, Here Comes the Bride,
Yeah,
because that music
was from an opera.
And it wasn't written for church. But that's just kind of silly. I mean, so much instrumental music that we play in church was not written for church. The other one that people love, the Trumpet Voluntary, was not a church piece either. So
Well, that's the one I had,
yeah.
because
So
it was approved.
yeah, when it gets into instrumental music, I think
Too, actually.
Fake Purcell, the
yeah,
Yes.
I don't know, how did that ever come out? Who did they decide wrote that piece of music? When I used it, it was Purcell, but then he got demoted and they decided someone else had written.
Yeah, Jeremiah Clark. I think people say it's Purcell now.
Oh, it's
Right.
got back.
Yeah, it's gone back. But there's a lot of back and forth about appropriateness or inappropriateness of music. I think instrumental music, you can hardly fault anything. I will point out that in the Wagner opera that includes the wedding march, the bride dies. So maybe that's not, I will also say that when we were kids out on the playground, we would sing Here Comes the Bride, Big, Fat, and Wide. And you don't necessarily want people thinking that when you come down the aisle. On the other hand, if people really want that piece of music, I am happy to play that piece of music for them. I don't care.
Would you refuse some pieces of music?
I don't think I've ever directly refused a piece of music, but I have asked people to think carefully about what it is that they're asking for. Again,
we played, and this sheeps will safely graze. I can't remember who wrote that.
Bach.
From the Messiah, I think.
No, Sheep May Safely Graze is Bach, and it's an instrumental piece. It never had words. So
I think that's when we were walking down the aisle. I can't remember. We had a St. Olaf crowd, so we had to be careful about good music.
Yeah, right. But just getting back to the payment thing for a minute, because like Janine really wants me to say how much I get paid for weddings. And honestly, it's been so long since I've done one, I would be making up a number. But church staffs do often say, considering the extravagance of the wedding industry that we were just talking about, the amount you're going to pay for dinner and a DJ and a dress and all this stuff, the church is the cheapest part of any wedding. Even if you do have to give a few $100s to the minister and the organist and the custodian, the church is still the cheapest part of any wedding. So
A few $100 to each of them?
huh? Are you in shock?
Yeah.
I was just teasing you, Tim.
No, it is a few $100s to each of them.
Well, that was another fun thing about Ellen's wedding. I hired the Gun High Jazz Band. They were happy to get $100 each or whatever.
Yeah, that's pretty fun.
They were so cute, and they played and for dancing. Weren't they great, Rhoda?
They were really good. Yeah, they were a really good jazz band,
So,
and they were really adorable.
So get Mary Ashley to plan your wedding. If anybody here ever
Yeah,
gets
well,
married
you
again,
know, we did, well, as I say, I figured if we were spending the money, we should try and, you know, benefit someone who needed the benefit. So
yeah,
Tim, can I just make a last point?
you can.
I think also there's for me, some awkwardness about mentioning an anniversary. We've been married, I don't know, 37 or 38 years. And a lot of people are divorced or, you know, have a lot of pain about what's happening or did happen to them. And it's kind of like, shh, we're married, but it's a private thing now. And I think that's been a change also, maybe. I'm not sure.
Do you think that anniversaries should be mentioned in church, or it's better that they not be?
Well, Greg sometimes mentions them, and I'm at the point of wanting a little discretion. That individuals may, like we had an elderly couple, and it was just a joy when they would talk about their 60 years together. I mean, it just touched people. But I think I would sort of want to leave it up to the individuals.
Well, I'm kind of proud to say we've been married for 50 years. It wasn't all great, but it was.
Congratulations, you made it. Here's to
So
the next
that's
50.
called life.
Yeah. I think when it comes to that, it's probably best to sort of just check in with people and see if they would like to have their anniversary acknowledged or not. Grace very rarely mentions anyone's anniversary out loud. In my previous congregation, there was a time in the service every Sunday when people who were observing their birthday or their wedding anniversary were invited to come up and have a prayer for them on that Sunday.
Really, how nice.
It really was nice. And some people chose to, and some people chose not to.
Especially if they were in the middle of a divorce.
Yeah, exactly. So but I think it's nice to just sort of make it voluntary that way and sort of not call people out anytime, not just about wedding anniversaries, but anytime you want to call somebody out for something, make sure they're really interested in being called out first.
Well, this Episcopal church on the East Coast that I go to always does birthdays, but doesn't mention how many years. And I think it's kind of nice because it singles, a big congregation. Sometimes people get lost, and here's a chance to that they're there.
At my old church, I developed a personal policy of going up if it was actually my birthday that day. But if my birthday was sometime during the week, then I'd wait till the next time.
Remind me Saturday that it's my oldest daughter's birthday, please.
I will not remember that, but I'll.
Anybody in the
reminder. Okay, we've hit 8 o'clock. These conversations are just always fun, and I kind of love that they go off in any direction that people want to take them. So next week, or 2 weeks from now, we get into the orders for daily prayer, which I actually really enjoy a lot, and people don't practice them all that much. So it'll be fun to talk about morning prayer, evening prayer, and night prayer next week, or in 2 weeks.
Good. 2 weeks.
Tim,
yeah.
Tim, I want to thank you for all the extra time you put in to make of the Lent and Lenten and Easter season so far so beautiful. I know you're so humble, but we really appreciate you, and it's wonderful how you serve our congregation. Praise be to God.
Thank you, Lois. I'm having a great time doing it. I can't wait to get back to doing it the normal way, but yeah. I'm having a great time doing it. So it looks like the normal way is coming pretty soon, right?
I hope so.
Yeah.
Oh, when?
Oh, I mean, I have no specific dates. I think we're all kind of excited that The governor thinks the state can reopen on June 15th, so maybe in June, I don't know. Keep watching.
Well, you don't have choir practice in the summer though, do you?
No, I wouldn't start choir till September regardless.
Grace had in-person Easter service, right?
We had an outdoor in-person.
Yeah, outdoors. Did that go okay? And
Yeah, so
Yes.
the people who were here say yes. So we had about 140 people, which, you know, for us, for Easter, that's small, but it's the most people we've had since the shutdown last spring. So we had all the windows open, and I and 2 trumpets were inside. I played the organ, and people sitting outside say they could hear it.
Yes.
So
Wonderful.
we've been having outdoor services since Ash Wednesday, and there's typically been maybe 30 to 40 people since.
Well, you added hymn singing, that helped.
We added hymn singing on Palm Sunday. And most Sundays I use an electric keyboard outside, but for Easter we decided to try using the organ, and it worked.
It worked beautifully, yeah.
Yep.
And I hate to disagree with Tim, but it was actually because I got to count, it was 142.
142 according to the ushers.
Both services or one service?
The outdoor.
There only was one in person.
Oh. Yeah, but they tally who's there when it's live stream.
Yeah, you can go back and see how many people have watched the live stream, and that number changes every day because a surprising number of people watch the service after the fact. So usually while the live stream is going on, we have maybe 90 to 100 people watching it live. And then you can look later on in the afternoon, most weeks, and you can see that like 160 people have watched it. So lots of people watch it after the fact.
I
And
think a number of congregations have said that they have better attendance with Zoom.
Yeah, it's true. And we have people coming from all over the country. And this Sunday at the in-person service, Pastor Frederica's daughter was baptized, and a number of people watched that via YouTube from Germany.
No kidding.
So, and you certainly can't attend a baptism from Germany normally without getting on an airplane. So that's pretty cool that they were able to do that. So yeah, between the in-person service and the live stream, we had a great attendance this Sunday, and things went well, and we're looking forward to what comes next.
I heard that Bells is coming next.
Bells have been rehearsing since March, and we just made a recording an hour ago.
How'd it go?
A Sunday or two, you'll get to hear the bells during the live stream.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yep.
Thank you, Tim.
Thanks you all for being here, and we'll.
Thank you, Tim.
2 weeks.
Tim.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.
All right.
Bye.
Yeah.